Insert a Shakespeare quote. So hello fellow book nerds, this is Gabby and today I am reviewing Ophelia After All by Racquel Marie. This is a new release, contemporary, which I don't read a lot, and I've never actually reviewed a contemporary book, exclusively contemporary book, and I've never made a dedicated review like this, but you guys voted, chose this one, so I was like, well, this is what we're doing. Every month I tell you what books are coming out, and every month you tell me which one you'd like me to review. This month it's Ophelia After All. Who knows what it's going to be next month? I have all of the playlists linked down below. So if that sounds interesting, stick around and, subscribe or whatever. But we're going to go by section as per usual. First, maybe I'll tell you what Ophelia After All is about. So, like I said, this is a contemporary YA novel. And we follow Ophelia, who is a girl known for, loving her flowers, being a good friend, always dressing with something with a flower in it, being a good daughter, and she is half Cuban, half Irish, and she is going into her final year of high school, and she's known as boy crazy Ophelia. She always has a crush, she's always, in love with some boy, and her life and her perception of herself is changing a little bit when she realizes that maybe she likes just more than just boys, and she's developing feelings for one of her classmates, who's a girl. So the book is about Ophelia figuring out her identity, her place, where she belongs, and how her family would react, and her friends, and who she is if she's not the boy crazy Ophelia. So that's the synopsis. I follow Racquel on Twitter, so I was anticipating this book because I think I saw her announce it on Twitter when it was just acquired, before it was even acquired. It's been a long time coming, so I'm very, very excited for the offer that this book actually came out. Seems like a lot of people are enjoying it, the cover's really nice, and I guess let's talk about it. So first section I always talk about is writing. So what did I think about writing? I think it was really well done for a YA. It was quite appropriate. It felt, authentic. It did feel a little bit repetitive. Sometimes I felt like we were going through the same thought process for fifth time, and things were told to us that I already knew because the character already told me 2 chapters ago. But I do think that's just a staple of the genre, if that makes sense. I just think that's kind of what it is like when you're reading a contemporary, and it was beating you over the head sometimes a little bit, but at the same time I still thought it was well written, it was appropriate for the genre. It's just not a genre I pick up, so therefore it was a little bit jarring for me. And I did find that the main character had just so many internal monologues, and they contributed a little bit to the repetitiveness, and that feeling that I'm being told the same thing again and again. That's something that I've noticed. And also she had a lot of internal monologues that I didn't find particularly particularly realistic, but at the same time a book cannot replicate the thought process exactly. It has to have a little bit more. Just the thought she had, I thought was very, this is what you're hearing from commentary or educational channels on YouTube on social justice and all of that. And it felt a little bit like those conversations were lifted and put into Ophelia's subconscious, which I don't know how realistic that is considering she is a 17-year-old, 17 or 18. She is a very self-aware, well-educated and 18-year-old. So it's not a major complaint, but sometimes it just kind of jarred me. And I think, again, it's to do with the fact that I'm not used to the genre, because in the genre, I think it's just completely different. YA, contemporary is just so different than a fantasy and sci-fi, and how those approach those topics, because they can do so in a different lens, through a fantastical lens. So that's just something I find interesting. But it was really well written, so I don't know, I sound like I'm saying it wasn't, because it was. Okay, now let's talk about plot. So, plot. I actually really enjoyed it because I thought this would be a sapphic love story. At least that's the vibe I got. Or some kind of love story, But it really isn't. It's really not a love story. It's not about Ophelia getting in a relationship. It's about Ophelia figuring out who she is, being honest with herself, with her family, with her friends. And all of those are very important topics. And I really enjoyed that. I really liked that it wasn't, she found the right person, everything clicked into place. Nothing went how she wanted it to go, and it felt overwhelming, but that's okay. And at the same time, I just really appreciated how it was Ophelia's story. It was her coming to terms with herself, her parents, her friends, and I really enjoyed that because it could have been simpler, but it ended up being a bit more complicated than just you meet the right person, you fall in love. So I appreciate that. I thought it was a really truthful and honest conversation to have, because you don't always just figure out that you maybe are not straight because you purely fell for one person. It's usually a longer process than that and a bit more complicated. And just because you're not in a relationship with a person of same sex doesn't mean you are not queer. So I really, really, really enjoyed that actually, and it really resonated with me personally. And as a bi woman myself, I found Ophelia's struggle to define herself really relatable. And I think when I was her age, I also had a lot of conflicting feelings about who I am and what I like. It's confusing, and I think this book really portrayed that well, and that made it also not as predictable as maybe I thought. Again, I don't read that genre that much, but I used to consume like queer and just contemporary books like YA, nobody's business. So, I do know the genre pretty well, but I did find this book to not be very predictable. Everything that I thought would happen didn't end up happening, and all of this, what I thought would be the plot and kind of the takeaway from it was not what it was what was not what the takeaway was, and I really appreciate that. And I also thought it was quite well paced. It was really interesting. I read it in 2 days. It was very easy to read, very enjoyable and engaging. I did find something frustrating, but it's not a criticism. It's actually a good thing, and I think it was done on purpose. But it was really frustrating because Ophelia would just had a very hard time kind of moving past some stuff, and every time we thought she made a bit of progress, she kind of took that back, or she just kind of kept saying and doing the same thing. But I think that, or maybe, took one step forward and took 2 steps back. But I think that's very realistic and that's very authentic. So it's not criticism, it's just something that I've noticed with, the structure and stuff. So I do think that it was a bit of that, but it was done well and it was quite truthful, I think. Okay, now let's talk about characters. So Ophelia obviously is the main character. I found it very relatable, and I think that she was so sure of who she was, and then her whole world kind of turned upside down and she wasn't. And like I said, I find her very relatable. It was a little bit frustrating to see her, push so hard. But again, I think that's relatable. And I think something that I've been thinking of is it sometimes feels like when I was reading these books, obviously, I'm only 23, so I'm not that far. I'm 24, sorry. So I'm only about 5-6 years away from Ophelia, but even that feels a bit more like a distance, because when I was reading books, maybe let's say I was 16, and it was about queer people and coming out stories, and they would usually be written by someone maybe 5, 6, 10 years older than I was at the time, because they've already gone through it or something. And it felt like the world was so much less welcoming, right? So there was so much more homophobia, less awareness, all of that. It felt like that was amplified. So in the story, it was such a daunting and scary thing for someone to come out, and it was a big deal because you never know how someone will react. Me now, I feel like there's so much knowledge, there's so much more acceptance, all of that, so you shouldn't be as scary. There's so much more queer people out, even in high schools, it shouldn't be as scary. But this book really showed that even if it's not overt homophobia or overt lack of acceptance, there still is a generational divide, and there, even not generations, just even within people, there's different perspectives, there's different approaches, and it's still scary because you still don't know if people will see it differently. Even if you think people will not outright reject you, will they look at you differently? Something that I found very powerful in this book was Ophelia thinking maybe they wouldn't see her differently, and they would just think she was completely the same, but she wasn't, because she discovered something very important about herself. So I don't know, it was very nuanced conversations that I maybe didn't appreciate going into the book, but definitely saw coming out of it. So that's really good. And I think especially if people of the target demographic read this, they could get so much out of it. And it's such a beautiful story. And I was talking about characters, so wasn't I? That was on Ophelia, and I also think the secondary characters were very, very well developed. They felt like three-dimensional people, and I liked that a lot of what was implied, not everything was said, and I really liked that because it felt a bit more organic. a little bit more like we were discovering this thing together, and just so many different perspectives on being queer and what it meant, and in, you know, in this context, in different contexts. So I really appreciate that conversation. I thought it was done very well. I guess let's talk about themes. Big theme was obviously what it means to be part of the LGBTQ plus community, what it means to be queer. That was done very well because there were so many different angles and so many different stories. It wasn't just Ophelia, but her friends, her family, people she knew. Different perspectives were very well explored, and I appreciated that it wasn't a monolith and not everyone had the same experience and everyone took a bit of a different route to get there, and I really liked that. I thought that was done very well. Very obvious but very well done theme. And another theme as well was definitely being a diaspora child and race and feeling like you belong, because Ophelia is half Cuban, half Irish, and has different relationships to both of her parents and both sides of her identity. So that was very interesting. So yeah, I think the themes were done very, very well. I guess that's it for overall thoughts on the book. I thought it was done very well. I did give it like 3.54 stars just because it's not personally what I would just pick up. But I'm glad I read it. I thought it is very good, especially for people who are actually, like I said, in the target demographic. I think they really, really enjoy it. And I would recommend it. I think it's a very valuable story that will resonate with a lot of people. Ophelia After All, a win. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know, what did you think of Ophelia After All? If you ended up reading it, if you didn't, let me know if I convinced you to pick it up or not. Subscribe if you're interested in these kinds of videos. I do a lot of reviews, so I'd appreciate all of you following me along for the journey. But thank you so much for watching. That's it from me, and I'll see you in my next one.